Chapter 16 of Memory: How to Develop, Train, and Use It. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Memory: How to Develop, Train, and Use It by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 16 How to Remember Occurrences. The phase of memory which manifests in the recording of and recollection of the occurrences and details of one's everyday life is far more important than would appear at first thought. The average person is under the impression that he remembers very well the occurrences of his everyday business, professional or social life, and is apt to be surprised to have it suggested to him that he really remembers but very little of what happens to him during his waking hours. In order to prove how very little of this kind is really remembered, let each student lay down this book at this place, and then, quieting his mind, let him endeavor to recall the incidents of the same day of the preceding week. He will be surprised to see how very little of what happened on that day he is really capable of recollecting. Then let him try the same experiment with the occurrences of yesterday. This result will also excite surprise. It is true that if he is reminded of some particular occurrence, he will recall it, more or less distinctly, but beyond that he will remember nothing. Let him imagine himself called upon to testify in court regarding the happenings of the previous day, or the day of the week before, and he will realize his position. The reason for his failure to easily remember the events referred to is to be found in the fact that he made no effort at the time to impress these happenings upon his subconscious mentality. He allowed them to pass from his attention like the proverbial water from the duck's back. He did not wish to be bothered with the recollection of trifles, and in endeavoring to escape from them, he made the mistake of failing to store them away. There is a vast difference between dwelling on the past and storing away past records for possible future reference. To allow the records of each day to be destroyed is like tearing up the important business papers in an office in order to avoid giving them a little space in the files. It is not advisable to expend much mental effort in fastening each important detail of the day upon the mind as it occurs, but there is an easier way that will accomplish the purpose, if one will but take a little trouble in that direction. We refer to the practice of reviewing the occurrences of each day, after the active work of the day is over. If you will give to the occurrences of each day a mental review in the evening, you will find that the act of reviewing will employ the attention to such an extent as to register the happenings in such a manner that they will be available if ever needed thereafter. It is akin to the filing of the business papers of the day, for possible future reference. Besides this advantage, these reviews will serve you well as a reminder of many little things of immediate importance which have escaped your recollection by reason of something that followed them in the field of attention. You will find that a little practice will enable you to review the events of the day, in a very short space of time, with a surprising degree of accuracy of detail. It seems that the mind will readily respond to this demand upon it. The process appears to be akin to a mental digestion, or rather a mental rumination, similar to that of the cow when it chews the cud that it has previously gathered. The thing is largely a knack easily acquired by a little practice. It will pay you for the little trouble and time that you expend upon it. As we have said, not only do you gain the advantage of storing away these records of the day for future use, but you also have your attention called to many important details that have escaped you, and you will find that many ideas of importance will come to you in your moments of leisure rumination. Let this work be done in the evening, when you feel at ease, but do not do it after you retire. The bed is made for sleep, not for thinking. You will find that the subconsciousness will awaken to the fact that it will be called upon later for the records of the day, and will, accordingly, take notice of what happens, in a far more diligent and faithful manner. The subconsciousness responds to a call made upon it in an astonishing manner, when it once understands just what is required of it. You will see that much of the virtue of the plan recommended consists in the fact that in the review there is an employment of the attention in a manner impossible during the haste and rush of the day's work. The faint impressions are brought out for examination, and the attention of the examination and review greatly deepen the impression in each case, so that it may be reproduced thereafter. In a sentence, it is the deepening of the faint impressions of the day. Thurlow Weed, a well-known politician of the last century, testifies to the efficacy of the above-mentioned method in his Memoirs. His plan was slightly different from that mentioned by us, but you will at once see that it involves the same principles, the same psychology. Mr. Weed says, "Some of my friends used to think that I was cut out for a politician, but I saw at once a fatal weakness. My memory was a sieve. I could remember nothing. Dates, names, appointments, faces, everything escaped me. I said to my wife, 'Catherine, I shall never make a successful politician, for I cannot remember, and that is a prime necessity of politicians. A politician who sees a man once should remember him forever.' My wife told me that I must train my memory. So when I came home that night, I sat down alone and spent 15 minutes trying silently to recall with accuracy the principal events of the day. I could remember but little at first. Now I remember that I could not then recall what I had for breakfast. After a few days' practice, I found I could recall more. Events came back to me more minutely, more accurately, and more vividly than at first. After a fortnight or so of this, Catherine said, 'Why don't you relate to me the events of the day, instead of recalling them to yourself? It would be interesting, and my interest in it would be a stimulus to you.' Having great respect for my wife's opinion, I began a habit of oral confession, as it were, which was continued for almost 50 years. Every night, the last thing before retiring, I told her everything I could remember that had happened to me, or about me, during the day. I generally recalled the very dishes I had for breakfast, dinner, and tea, the people I had seen, and what they had said, the editorials I had written for my paper, giving her a brief abstract of them. I mentioned all the letters I had seen and received, and the very language used, as nearly as possible. When I had walked or ridden, I told her everything that had come within my observation. I found that I could say my lesson better and better every year, and instead of the practice growing irksome, it became a pleasure to go over again the events of the day. I am indebted to this discipline for a memory of unusual tenacity, and I recommend the practice to all who wish to store up facts, or expect to have much to do with influencing men. The careful student, after reading these words of Thurlow Weed, will see that in them he has not only given a method of recalling the particular class of occurrences mentioned in this lesson, but has also pointed out a way whereby the entire field of memory may be trained and developed. The habit of reviewing and telling the things that one perceives, does, and thinks during the day naturally sharpens the powers of future observation, attention, and perception. If you are witnessing a thing which you know that you will be called upon to describe to another person, you will instinctively apply your attention to it. The knowledge that you will be called upon for a description of a thing will give the zest of interest or necessity to it, which may be lacking otherwise. If you will sense things with the knowledge that you will be called upon to tell of them later on, you will give the interest and attention that go to make sharp, clear, and deep impressions on the memory. In this case, the seeing and hearing has a meaning to you, and a purpose. In addition to this, the work of review establishes a desirable habit of mind. If you don't care to relate the occurrences to another person, learn to tell them to yourself in the evening. Play the part yourself. There is a valuable secret of memory embedded in this chapter, if you are wise enough to apply it. End of chapter 16. Of Memory, How to Develop, Train, and Use It. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Memory, How to Develop, Train, and Use It, by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 17. How to Remember Facts. In speaking of this phase of memory, we use the word fact in the sense of an ascertained item of knowledge, rather than in the sense of a happening, etc. In this sense, the memory of facts is the ability to store away and recollect items of knowledge bearing upon some particular thing under consideration. If we are considering the subject of horse, the facts that we wish to remember are the various items of information and knowledge regarding the horse that we have acquired during our experience. Facts that we have seen, heard, or read regarding the animal in question, and to that which concerns it. We are continually acquiring items of information regarding all kinds of subjects, and yet when we wish to collect them, we often find the task rather difficult, even though the original impressions were quite clear. The difficulty is largely due to the fact that the various facts are associated in our minds only by contiguity in time or place, or both, the associations of relation being lacking. In other words, we have not properly classified and indexed our bits of information, and do not know where to begin to search for them. It is like the confusion of the business man who kept all his papers in a barrel, without index or order. He knew that they were all there, but he had hard work to find any one of them when it was required. Or we are like the compositor whose type has become pied, and then thrown into a big box. When he attempts to set up a book page, he will find it very difficult, if not impossible, whereas if each letter were in its proper box, he would set up the page in a short time. This matter of association by relation is one of the most important things in the whole subject of thought, and the degree of correct and efficient thinking depends materially upon it. It does not suffice us to merely know a thing, we must know where to find it when we want it. As old Judge Sharswood of Pennsylvania once said, "It is not so much to know the law as to know where to find it." Kay says, "Over the associations formed by contiguity in time or space we have but little control. They are in a manner accidental, depending upon the order in which the objects present themselves to the mind. On the other hand, association by similarity is largely put in our own power, for we, in a measure, select those objects that are to be associated, and bring them together in the mind. We must be careful, however, only to associate together such things as we wish to be associated together, and to recall each other, and the associations we form should be based on fundamental and essential, and not upon mere superficial or casual resemblances. When things are associated by their accidental, and not by their essential qualities, by their superficial and not by their fundamental relations, they will not be available when wanted, and will be of little real use. When we associate what is new with what most nearly resembles it in the mind already, we give it its proper place in our fabric of thought. By means of association by similarity, we tie up our ideas, as it were, in separate bundles, and it is of the utmost importance that all the ideas that most nearly resemble each other be in one bundle. The best way to acquire correct associations, and many of them, for a separate fact that you wish to store away so that it may be recollected when needed, some useful bit of information or interesting bit of knowledge that may come in handy later on, is to analyze it and its relations. This may be done by asking yourself questions about it. Each thing that you associate it with in your answers being just one additional cross-index, whereby you may find it readily when you want it. As Kay says, the principle of asking questions and obtaining answers to them may be said to characterize all intellectual effort. This is the method by which Socrates and Plato drew out the knowledge of their pupils, filling in the gaps and attaching new facts to those already known. When you wish to so consider a fact, ask yourself the following questions about it. 1. Where did it come from or originate? 2. What caused it? 3. What history or record has it? 4. What are its attributes, qualities, and characteristics? 5. What things can I most readily associate with it? What is it like? 6. What is it good for? How may it be used? What can I do with it? 7. What does it prove? What can be deduced from it? 8. What are its natural results? What happens because of it? 9. What is its future, and its natural or probable end or finish? 10. What do I think of it on the whole? What are my general impressions regarding it? 11. What do I know about it, in the way of general information? 12. What have I heard about it, and from whom, and when? If you will take the trouble to put any fact through the above rigid examination, you will not only attach it to hundreds of convenient and familiar other facts, so that you will remember it readily upon occasion, but you will also create a new subject of general information in your mind, of which this particular fact will be the central thought. Similar systems of analysis have been published and sold by various teachers, at high prices, and many men have considered that the results justified the expenditure. So do not pass it by lightly. The more other facts that you manage to associate with any one fact, the more pegs will you have to hang your facts upon, the more loose ends will you have whereby to pull that fact into the field of consciousness, the more cross-indexes will you have whereby you may run down the fact when you need it. The more associations you attach to a fact, the more meaning does that fact have for you, and the more interest will be created regarding it in your mind. Moreover, by so doing, you make very probable the automatic or involuntary recollection of that fact, when you are thinking of some of its associated subjects. That is, it will come into your mind naturally in connection with something else, in a "that reminds me" fashion. And the oftener that you are involuntarily reminded of it, the clearer and deeper does its impression become on the records of your memory. The oftener you use a fact, the easier does it become to recall it when needed. The favorite pen of a man is always at his hand in a remembered position, while the less used eraser or similar thing has to be searched for, often without success. And the more associations that you bestow upon a fact, the oftener it is likely to be used. Another point to be remembered is that the future association of a fact depends very much upon your system of filing away facts. If you will think of this when endeavoring to store away a fact for future reference, you will be very apt to find the best mental pigeonhole for it. File it away with the thing it most resembles, or to which it has the most familiar relationship. The child does this involuntarily. It is nature's own way. For instance, the child sees a zebra. It files away that animal as a donkey with stripes. A giraffe as a long-necked horse. A camel as a horse with long crooked legs, long neck, and humps on its back. The child always attaches its new knowledge or fact onto some familiar fact or bit of knowledge. Sometimes the result is startling, but the child remembers by means of it nevertheless. The grown-up children will do well to build similar connecting links of memory. Attach the new things to some old familiar thing. It is easy when you once have the knack of it. The table of questions given a little farther back will bring to mind many connecting links. Use them. If you need any proof of the importance of association by relation and of the laws governing its action, you have but to recall the ordinary train of thought, or train of images in the mind, of which we become conscious when we are daydreaming, or indulging in reverie, or even in general thought regarding any subject. You will see that every mental image or idea or recollection is associated with and connected to the preceding thought and the one following it. It is a chain that is endless, until something breaks into the subject from outside. A fact flashes into your mind, apparently from space and without any reference to anything else. In such cases, you will find that it occurs either because you had previously set your subconscious mentality at work upon some problem, or bit of recollection, and the flash was the belated and delayed result, or else that the fact came into your mind because of its association with some other fact, which in turn came from a precedent one, and so on. You hear a distant railroad whistle and you think of a train, then of a journey, then of some distant place, then of someone in that place, then of some event in the life of that person, then of a similar event in the life of another person, then of that other person, then of his or her brother, then of that brother's last business venture, then of that business, then of some other business resembling it, then of some people in that other business, then of their dealings with a man you know, then of the fact that another man of a similar name to the last man owes you some money, then of your determination to get that money. Then you make a memorandum to place the claim in the hands of a lawyer to see whether it cannot be collected now, although the man was execution-proof last year. From distant locomotive whistle to the possible collection of the account. And yet, the links forgotten, the man will say that he just happened to think of the debtor, or that it somehow flashed right into my mind, etc. But it was nothing but the law of association, that's all. Moreover, you will now find that whenever you hear mentioned the term association of mental ideas, etc., you will remember the above illustration, or part of it. We have forged a new link in the chain of association for you, and years from now it will appear in your thoughts. End of chapter 17. Of Memory, How to Develop, Train, and Use It. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Memory, How to Develop, Train, and Use It, by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 18. How to Remember Words, etc. In a preceding chapter we gave a number of instances of persons who had highly developed their memory of words, sentences, etc. History is full of instances of this kind. The moderns fall far behind the ancients in this respect, probably because there does not exist the present necessity for the feats of memory which were once accepted as commonplace and not out of the ordinary. Among ancient people, when printing was unknown and manuscripts scarce and valuable, it was the common custom of the people to learn by heart the various sacred teachings of their respective religions. The sacred books of the Hindus were transmitted in this way, and it was a common thing among the Hebrews to be able to recite the books of Moses and the prophets entirely from memory. Even to this day, the faithful Mohammedans are taught to commit the entire Koran to memory, and investigation reveals, always, that there has been used the identical process of committing these sacred books to memory and recalling them at will, the natural method, instead of an artificial one. And therefore we shall devote this chapter solely to this method, whereby poems or prose may be committed to memory and recalled readily. This natural method of memorizing words, sentences, or verses is no royal road. It is a system which must be mastered by steady work and faithful review. One must start at the beginning and work his way up. But the result of such work will astonish anyone not familiar with it. It is the very same method that the Hindus, Hebrews, Mohammedans, Norsemen, and the rest of the races memorized their thousands of verses and hundreds of chapters of the sacred books of their people. It is the method of the successful actor, and the popular elocutionist, not to mention those speakers who carefully commit to memory their impromptu addresses and extemporaneous speeches. This natural system of memorizing is based upon the principle which has already been alluded to in this book, and by which every child learns its alphabet and its multiplication table, as well as the little piece that it recites for the entertainment of its fond parents and the bored friends of the family. That principle consists of the learning of one line at a time, and reviewing that line, then learning a second line and reviewing that, and then reviewing the two lines together, and so on, each edition being reviewed in connection with those that went before. The child that learns the sound of A, then it learns B, then it associates the sound of A, B in its first review. The C is added, and the review runs, A, B, C, and so on until Z is reached, and the child is able to review the entire list from A to Z, inclusive. The multiplication table begins with its twice 1 is 2, then twice 2 is 4, and so on, a little at a time, until the 2's are finished and the 3's begun. This process is kept up, by constant addition and constant review, until 12 12's finishes up the list, and the child is able to repeat the tables from first to last from memory. But there is more to it in the case of the child than merely learning to repeat the alphabet or the multiplication table. There is also the strengthening of the memory as a result of its exercise and use. Memory, like every faculty of the mind, or every muscle of the body, improves and develops by intelligent and reasonable use and exercise. Not only does this exercise and use develop the memory along the particular line of the faculty used, but also along every line and faculty. This is so because the exercise develops the power of concentration, and the use of the voluntary attention. We suggest that the student who wishes to acquire a good memory for words, sentences, etc., begin at once, selecting some favorite poem for the purpose of the demonstration. Then let him memorize one verse of not only 4 to 6 lines to begin with. Let him learn this verse perfectly, line by line, until he is able to repeat it without a mistake. Let him be sure to be letter perfect in that verse, so perfect that he will see even the capital letters and the punctuation marks when he recites it. Then let him stop for the day. The next day let him repeat the verse learned the day before, and then let him memorize a second verse in the same way, and just as perfectly. Then let him review the first and second verses together. This addition of the second verse to the first verse serves to weld the two together by association, and each review of them together serves to add a little bit to the weld, until they become joined in the mind, as are A, B, C. The third day let him learn a third verse in the same way, and then review the 3. Continue this for say a month, adding a new verse each day, and adding to it the verses preceding it. But constantly review them from beginning to end. He cannot review them too often. He will be able to have them flow along like the letters of the alphabet from A to Z if he reviews properly and often enough. Then, if he can spare the time, let him begin the second month by learning 2 verses each day, and adding to those that precede them with constant and faithful reviews. He will find that he can memorize 2 verses in the second month as easily as he did the 1 verse in the first month. His memory has been trained to this extent. And so he may proceed from month to month, adding an extra verse to his daily task, until he is unable to spare the time for all the work, or until he feels satisfied with what he has accomplished. Let him use moderation and not try to become a phenomenon. Let him avoid overstraining. After he has memorized the entire poem, let him start with a new one, but not forget to revive the old one at frequent intervals. If he finds it impossible to add the necessary number of new verses by reasons of other occupation, etc., let him not fail to keep up his review work. The exercise and review is more important than mere addition of so many new verses. Let him vary the verses or poems with prose selections. He will find the verses of the Bible very well adapted for such exercise, as they lend themselves easily to registration in the memory. Shakespeare may be used to advantage in this work. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, or The Lady of the Lake by Scott, or the Song Celestial or Light of Asia, both by Edwin Arnold, will be found to be well adapted to this system of memorizing, the verses of each being apt to stick in the memory, and each poem being sufficiently long to satisfy the requirements of even the most ambitious student. To look at the complete poem, any of those mentioned, it would seem almost impossible that one would ever be able to memorize and recite it from beginning to end, letter perfect. But on the principle of the continual dripping of water wearing away the stone, or the snowball increasing at each roll, this practice of a little being associated to what he already has will soon allow him to accumulate a wonderfully large store of memorized verses, poems, recitations, etc. It is an actual demonstration of the catchy words of the popular song which informs one that "every little bit added to what you've got makes just a little bit more." After he has acquired quite a large assortment of memorized selections, he will find it impossible to review them all at one time, but he should be sure to review them all at intervals, no matter how many days may elapse between each review. The student who has familiarized himself with the principles upon which memory depends, as given in the preceding chapters, will at once see that the three principles of attention, association, and repetition are employed in the natural method herein recommended. Attention must be given in order to memorize each verse in the first place. Association is employed in the relationship created between the old verses and the new ones, and repetition is employed by the frequent reviewing, which serves to deepen the memory impression each time the poem is repeated. Moreover, the principle of interest is invoked in the gradual progress made, and the accomplishment of what at first seemed to be an impossible task. The game element is thus supplied, which serves as an incentive. These combined principles render this method an ideal one, and it is not to be wondered that the race has so recognized it from the earliest times. End of chapter 18. Of Memory: How to Develop, Train, and Use It. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Memory: How to Develop, Train, and Use It, by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 19. How to Remember Books, Plays, Tales, etc. In the preceding chapters we have given you suggestions for the development of the principal forms of memory. But there are still other phases or forms of memory which, while coming under the general classification, may be still considered as worthy of special consideration. For instance, there may be suggestions given regarding the memorization of the contents of the books you read, the stories you hear, etc., and so we have thought it advisable to devote one chapter to a consideration of these various phases of memory that have been left out of the other chapters. Many of us fail to remember the important things in the books we read, and are often mortified by our ignorance regarding the contents of the works of leading authors, or of popular novels, which, although we have read, we have failed to impress upon the records of our memory. Of course, we must begin by reminding you of the ever-present necessity of interest and attention. We cannot escape from these principles of the memory. The trouble with the majority of people is that they read books to kill time, as a sort of mental narcotic or anesthetic, instead of for the purpose of obtaining something of interest from them. By this course, we not only lose all that may be of importance or value in the book, but also acquire the habit of careless reading and inattention. The prevalence of the habit of reading many newspapers and trashy novels is responsible for the apparent inability of many persons to intelligently absorb and remember the contents of a book worth while when they do happen to take up such a one. But still, even the most careless reader may improve himself and cure the habit of inattention and careless reading. Noah Porter says, "We have not read an author till we have seen his object, whatever it may be, as he saw it." Also, "Read with attention. This is the rule that takes precedence of all others. It stands instead of a score of minor directions. Indeed, it comprehends them all, and is the golden rule. The page should be read as if it were never to be seen a second time. The mental eye should be fixed as if there were no other object to think of. The memory should grasp the facts like a vice. The impressions should be distinctly and sharply received." It is not necessary, nor is it advisable to attempt to memorize the text of a book, excepting, perhaps, a few passages that may seem worthy to be treasured up word for word. The principal thing to be remembered about a book is its meaning, what it is about. Then may follow the general outline and the details of the story, essay, treatise, or whatever it may be. The question that should be asked oneself, after the book is completed, or after the completion of some particular part of the book, is, What was the writer's idea? What did he wish to say? Get the idea of the writer. By taking this mental attitude, you practically place yourself in the place of the writer, and thus take part in the idea of the book. You thus view it from the inside rather than from the outside. You place yourself at the center of the thing instead of upon its circumference. If the book be a history, biography, autobiography, narrative, or story of fact or fiction, you will find it of value to visualize its occurrences as the story unfolds. That is, endeavor to form at least a faint mental picture of the events related, so that you can see them in your mind's eye, or imagination. Use your imagination in connection with the mechanical reading. In this way you build up a series of mental pictures which will be impressed upon your mind, and which will be remembered just as are the scenes of a play that you have witnessed, or an actual event that you have seen, only less distinct, of course. Particularly you should endeavor to form a clear mental picture of each character, until each one is endowed with at least a semblance of reality to you. By doing this, you will impart a naturalness to the events of the story, and you will obtain a new pleasure from your reading. Of course, this plan will make you read more slowly, and many trashy tales will cease to interest you, for they do not contain the real elements of interest, but this is no loss, but is a decided gain for you. At the end of each reading, take the time to mentally review the progress of the story. Let the characters and scenes pass before your mental vision as in a moving picture. And when the book is finally completed, review it as a whole. By following this course, you will not only acquire the habit of easily remembering the tales and books that you have read, but will also obtain much pleasure by rereading favorite stories in your imagination, years after. You will find that your favorite characters will take on a new reality for you, and will become as old friends in whose company you may enjoy yourself at any time, and whom you may dismiss when they tire you, without offense. In the case of scientific treatises, essays, etc., you may follow a similar plan by dividing the work into small sections and mentally reviewing the thought, not the words, of each section until you make it your own, and then by adding new sections to your review you may gradually absorb and master the entire work. All this requires time, work, and patience, but you will be repaid for your expenditure. You will find that this plan will soon render you impatient at books of little consequence, and will drive you to the best books on any given subject. You will begin to begrudge your time and attention, and hesitate about bestowing them upon any but the very best books. But in this you gain. In order to fully acquaint yourself with a book, before reading it you should familiarize yourself with its general character. To do this you should pay attention to the full title, and the subtitle if there be any, the name of the author, and the list of other books that he has written, if they are noted on the title page, or the one preceding it, according to the usual custom. You should read the preface and study carefully the table of contents, that you may know the field or general subject covered by the book. In other words, endeavor to get the general outline of the book, into which you may afterwards fill in the details. In reading a book of serious import, you should make it a point to fully grasp the meaning of each paragraph before passing on to the next one. Let nothing pass you that you do not understand, at least in a general way. Consult the dictionary for words not familiar to you, so that you may grasp the full idea intended to be expressed. At the end of each chapter, section, and part, you should review that which you have read, until you are able to form a mental picture of the general ideas contained therein. To those who wish to remember the dramatic productions that they have attended, we would say that the principles above mentioned may be applied to this form of memory as well as to the memory of books. By taking an interest in each character as it appears, by studying carefully each action and scene, and then reviewing each act in the intervals between the acts, and by finally reviewing the entire play after your return home, you will fasten the whole play as a complete mental picture on the records of your memory. If you have acquainted yourself with what we have just said regarding the recollection of the contents of books, you will be able to modify and adapt them to the purpose of recollecting plays and dramatic productions. You will find that the oftener you review a play, the more clearly you will remember it. Many little details overlooked at first will come into the field of consciousness and fit into their proper places. Sermons, lectures, and other discourses may be remembered by bestowing interest and attention upon them, and by attempting to grasp each general idea advanced, and by noting the passage from one general idea to another. If you will practice this a few times, you will find that when you come to review the discourse, and this you should always do, it is the natural way of developing memory, the little details will come up and fit into their proper places. In this form of memory, the important thing is to train the memory by exercise and review. You will find that at each review of a discourse you will have made progress. By practice and exercise, the subconscious mentality will do better work, and will show that it is rising to its new responsibilities. You have allowed it to sleep during the many discourses to which you have listened, and it must be taught new habits. Let it know that it is expected to retain that which it hears, and then exercise it frequently by reviews of discourses, and you will be surprised at the degree of the work it will perform for you. Not only will you remember better, but you will hear better and more intelligently. The subconsciousness, knowing that it will be called upon later on to recollect what is being said, will urge you to bestow the attention necessary to supply it with the proper material. To those who have had trouble in remembering discourses, we urge that they should begin to attend lectures and other forms of discourse, with the distinct purpose of developing that form of memory. Give to the subconscious mentality the positive command that it shall attend to what is being said, and shall record the same in such a way that when you review the discourse afterward, you will be presented with a good synopsis or syllabus of it. You should avoid any attempt to memorize the words of the discourse, your purpose being to absorb and record the ideas and general thoughts expressed. Interest, attention, practice, review, these are the important points in memory. To remember stories, anecdotes, fables, etc., the principles given above are to be employed. The main thing in memorizing an anecdote is to be able to catch the fundamental idea underlying it, and the epigrammatic sentence or central phrase which forms the point of the story. Be sure that you catch these perfectly, and then commit the point to memory. If necessary, make a memorandum of the point, until you have opportunity to review the story in your mind. Then carefully review it mentally, letting the mental image of the idea pass before you in review, and then repeating it to yourself in your own words. By rehearsing and reviewing the story, you make it your own, and will be able to relate it afterward just as you would something that you had actually experienced. So true is this principle, that when carried too far, it endows the story with a false sense of actuality. Who has not known men who told a story so often that they came actually to believe it themselves? Do not carry the principle to this extreme, but use it in moderation. The trouble with many men is that they attempt to repeat a tale, long after they have heard it, without reviewing or rehearsing in the meantime. Consequently they omit many important points, because they have failed to impress the story as a whole upon the memory. In order to know an anecdote properly, one should be able to see its characters and incidents, just as he does when he sees an illustrated joke in a comic paper. If you can make a mental picture of an anecdote, you will be apt to remember it with ease. The noted storytellers review and rehearse their jokes, and have been known to try them on their unsuspecting friends in order to get the benefit of practice, before relating them in public. This practice has been called by flippant people "trying it on the dog." But it has its good points and advantages. It at least saves one the mortification of being compelled to finish up a long drawn out tale by, I'm afraid I've forgotten just how that story ended, but it was a good one. End of chapter 19. Of Memory, How to Develop, Train, and Use It. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Memory, How to Develop, Train, and Use It, by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 20. General Instructions. In this chapter we shall call your attention to certain of the general principles already mentioned in the preceding chapters, for the purpose of further impressing them upon your mind, and in order that you may be able to think of and to consider them independent of the details of the special phases of memory. This chapter may be considered in the nature of a general review of certain fundamental principles mentioned in the body of the work. Point 1. Give to the things that you wish to memorize as great a degree of concentrated attention as possible. We have explained the reason for this advice in many places in the book. The degree of concentrated attention bestowed upon the object under consideration determines the strength, clearness, and depth of the impression received and stored away in the subconsciousness. The character of these stored away impressions determines the degree of ease in remembrance and recollection. Point 2. In considering an object to be memorized, endeavor to obtain the impressions through as many faculties and senses as possible. The reason for this advice should be apparent to you, if you have carefully read the preceding chapters. An impression received through both sound and sight is doubly as strong as one received through but one of these channels. You may remember a name or word either by having seen it in writing or print, or else by reason of having heard it. But if you have both seen and heard it, you have a double impression, and possess two possible ways of reviving the impression. You are able to remember an orange by reason of having seen it, smelt it, felt it, and tasted it, and having heard its name pronounced. Endeavor to know a thing from as many sense impressions as possible. Use the eye to assist ear impressions, and the ear to assist in eye impressions. See the thing from as many angles as possible. Point 3. Sense impressions may be strengthened by exercising the particular faculty through which the weak impressions are received. You will find that either your eye memory is better than your ear memory, or vice versa. The remedy lies in exercising the weaker faculty so as to bring it up to the standard of the stronger. The chapters of eye and ear training will help you along these lines. The same rule applies to the several phases of memory. Develop the weak ones, and the strong ones will take care of themselves. The only way to develop a sense or faculty is to intelligently train, exercise, and use it. Use, exercise, and practice will work miracles in this direction. Point 4. Make your first impression strong and firm enough to serve as a basis for subsequent ones. Get into the habit of fixing a clear, strong impression of a thing to be considered from the first. Otherwise you are trying to build up a large structure upon a poor foundation. Each time you revive an impression you deepen it, but if you have only a dim impression to begin with, the deepened impressions will not include details omitted in the first one. It is like taking a good sharp negative of a picture that you intend to enlarge afterward. The details lacking in the small picture will not appear in the enlargement, but those that do appear in the small one will be enlarged with the picture. Point 5. Revive your impressions frequently and thus deepen them. You will know more of a picture by seeing it a few minutes every day for a week than you would by spending several hours before it at one time. So it is with the memory. By recalling an impression a number of times, you fix it indelibly in your mind in such a way that it may be readily found when needed. Such impressions are like favorite tools which you need every little while. They are not apt to be mislaid as are those which are but seldom used. Use your imagination in going over a thing that you wish to remember. If you are studying a thing, you will find that this going over in your imagination will help you materially in disclosing the things that you have not remembered about it. By thus recognizing your weak points of memory, you may be able to pick up the missing details when you study the object itself the next time. Point 6. Use your memory and place confidence in it. One of the important things in the cultivation of the memory is the actual use of it. Begin to trust it a little, and then more, and then still more, and it will rise to the occasion. The man who has to tie a string around his finger in order to remember certain things soon begins to cease to use his memory, and in the end forgets to remember the string, or what it is for. There are many details, of course, with which it is folly to charge the memory, but one should never allow his memory to fall into disuse. If you are in an occupation in which the work is done by mechanical helps, then you should exercise the memory by learning verses or other things, in order to keep it in active practice. Do not allow your memory to atrophy. Point 7. Establish as many associations for an impression as possible. If you have studied the preceding chapters, you will recognize the value of this point. Association is memory's method of indexing and cross-indexing. Each association renders it easier to remember or recollect the thing. Each association gives you another string to your mental bow. Endeavor to associate a new bit of knowledge with something already known by and familiar to you. In this way, to avoid the danger of having the thing isolated and alone in your mind, without a label, or index number and name, connect your object or thought to be remembered with other objects or thoughts, by the association of contiguity in space and time, and by relationship of kind, resemblance, or oppositeness. Sometimes the latter is very useful, as in the case of the man who said that "Smith reminds me so much of Brown, he's so different." You will often be able to remember a thing by remembering something else that happened at the same place, or about the same time. These things give you the loose ends of recollection whereby you may unwind the ball of memory. In the same way, one is often able to recollect names by slowly running over the alphabet, with a pencil, until the sight of the capital first letter of the name brings the memory of those following it. This, however, only when the name has previously been memorized by sight. In the same way, the first few notes of a musical selection will enable you to remember the whole air, or the first words of a sentence, the entire speech or selection following it. In trying to remember a thing which has escaped you, you will find it helpful to think of something associated with that thing, even remotely. A little practice will enable you to recollect the thing along the lines of the faintest association or clue. Some men are adept memory detectives, following this plan. The loose end in memory is all the expert requires. Any associations furnish these loose ends. An interesting and important fact to remember in this connection is that if you have some one thing that tends to escape your memory, you may counteract the trouble by noting the associated things that have previously served to bring it into mind with you. The associated thing, once noted, may thereafter be used as a loose end with which to unwind the elusive fact or impression. This idea of association is quite fascinating when you begin to employ it in your memory exercises and work. And you will find many little methods of using it. But always use natural association, and avoid the temptation of endeavoring to tie your memory up with the red tape of the artificial systems. Point 8. Group your impressions. This is but a form of association, but is very important. If you can arrange your bits of knowledge and fact into logical groups, you will always be master of your subject. By associating your knowledge with other knowledge along the same general lines, both by resemblances and by opposites, you will be able to find what you need just when you need it. Napoleon Bonaparte had a mind trained along these lines. He said that his memory was like a large case of small drawers and pigeonholes, in which he filed his information according to its kind. In order to do this, he used the methods mentioned in this book of comparing the new thing with the old ones, and then deciding into which group it naturally fitted. This is largely a matter of practice and knack, but it may be acquired by a little thought and care, aided by practice. And it will repay one well for the trouble in acquiring it. The following table will be found useful in classifying objects, ideas, facts, etc., so as to correlate and associate them with other facts of a like kind. The table is to be used in the line of questions addressed to oneself regarding the thing under consideration. It somewhat resembles the table of questions given in Chapter 17 of this book, but has the advantage of brevity. Memorize this table and use it. You will be delighted at the results, after you have caught the knack of applying it. Query Table. Ask yourself the following questions regarding the thing under consideration. It will draw out many bits of information and associated knowledge in your mind. 1. What? 2. Whence? 3. Where? 4. When? 5. How? 6. Why? 7. Whither? While the above 7 queries are given you as a means of acquiring clear impressions and associations, they will also serve as a magic key to knowledge, if you use them intelligently. If you can answer these questions regarding anything, you will know a great deal about that particular thing. And after you have answered them fully, there will be but little unexpressed knowledge regarding that thing left in your memory. Try them on one thing. You cannot understand them otherwise, unless you have a very good imagination. Fini. End of Chapter 20. End of Memory: How to Develop, Train, and Use It, by William Walker Atkinson. This recording has been by Roger Melin.